When Mac opened the door, his wife was cooking dinner. The smell of herbs, rice steaming on the fire, the sound of her voice, everything was exactly as you remembered. Everything except for one thing. Nak had died 2 weeks earlier. They buried her and the child she never got to hold. So when he walked into their home that night and she turned to smile at him, the villagers watched from the shadows, terrified, because they knew what Mac did not. He was living with a ghost. Before the war, Mac and Nak were inseparable. They married young in a small village along the Phra Khanong river. Neighbors would say they could hear her laughing through the palm trees and see him carrying her across the flooded paths just to keep her feet dry. When Nak became pregnant, Mac promised he would return before the baby came. He held her hands, swore that nothing in this world or the next would keep him from her. But some villagers whispered that Nak's pregnancy was difficult, that the midwife had grown worried, that strange cries were heard from their home at night. And on the day Nak left for war, the river rose higher than anyone had ever seen. The old women shook their heads, calling it a bad omen. Nak smiled anyway and waved him goodbye. No one in the village would ever forget that smile. While Mac fought on distant fields, the village grew quiet around Nak's home. The midwife was seen entering, but never spoke of what happened inside. Some say the labor was long, far longer than it should have been. Others claimed they heard a single cry, cut short, and then nothing. Not a voice, not a breath, not a sound. The villagers gathered outside, but no one dared to enter. The wind carried incense smoke and the smell of earth and river water, as if the world itself had fallen silent. When the door finally opened, the midwife stood pale and trembling. She whispered only 2 words before collapsing to her knees. Both gone. Nak had died in childbirth. The child she waited for never drew breath. The villagers buried them together before the storm rolled in. But some claimed that as the rain fell, they heard a woman crying from beneath the earth. When the war finally ended, Mac limped home across the flooded fields. He imagined Nak waiting for him, hands resting on her belly, smiling the way she always did. As he reached the village, he saw lanterns glowing in their window. A shadow moved inside, soft, familiar. He called her name. Nak? The door slid open, and there she stood, hair tied the way she always wore it, dress drifting in the evening breeze, eyes shining with tears. She ran to him, arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. Mac held her close and whispered that he had kept his promise. He had returned to her. From the far end of the street, the villagers watched in silence. Not one of them moved, not one of them spoke, because they had buried Nak and the child she never had 2 weeks before. Mac believed his life had returned to normal. He worked the fields, ate meals by the fire, slept beside the woman he loved, but the village had changed. When Nak walked through the market, women turned their faces away. Vendors who once greeted her now closed their stalls, pretending not to see. Children who used to run to her hid behind their mothers' legs. Some began to cry just at the sound of her voice. Mac asked them why. No one answered, not a word. One old man who had known Nak since her childhood trembled when she passed. His prayer beads shook in his hands. That night, Mac told Nak that the villagers were only afraid because of the war, that they would warm to her again. But as he held her close, he noticed something he had not before. Her skin felt cold, too cold. One evening, as the monsoon winds faded, Nak sat grinding herbs by the fire. Mac stepped outside to fetch limes from the tree. He heard her humming the same lullaby she used to sing before the baby came. Then he heard it, a soft thud, something rolling across the floor. A lime had slipped from Nag's hand and bounced into the far corner of the room. Mac turned back toward the doorway, just in time to see her reach for it. Her arm stretched out, slowly, silently, farther than any human arm should. The elbow did not bend, the shoulder did not move. Her pale hand slid across the floorboards like a shadow made of flesh until her fingers closed around the lime. Then her arm snapped back into place. Nag did not notice. She simply kept humming, and Mac stood frozen, realizing at last that something was terribly wrong. Mac did not scream. He did not run. He forced himself to breathe, slow and steady, as if nothing had happened. Nag turned toward him, smiling. Is something wrong? Mac shook his head and told her he was only tired from the long walk home. He sat beside her, hands trembling, pretending to admire the herbs she ground, while his eyes avoided her arms. That night, he lay awake beside her, listening to her breathe, except he realized she wasn't. Her chest never rose, not once. When the first light touched the river, Mac kissed her forehead and whispered that he needed to visit the temple. Nag smiled and told him to hurry home. As he stepped outside, he felt her eyes on his back, watching. Mac ran barefoot across the riverbank, temple bells echoing through the morning mist. He stumbled into the courtyard, crying out for help. The head monk did not comfort him. He did not ask what was wrong. He simply looked at Mac and said, "We know." Other monks emerged from the shadows, their faces grave, their prayer beads already in hand. The head monk spoke again. "The spirit that follows you clings to this world through love, but love cannot break death." He ordered the temple doors barred. Incense was lit. Sacred cloth was placed over the altar. Ancient chants began to tremble in the air. Mac asked if Nag could be saved. The head monk closed his eyes and answered, "If she learns the truth, she will not let you go. She will tear this village apart." As the chanting grew louder, the air inside the temple shifted. The candles flickered backward against the wind. Outside, the ground trembled. A cold voice echoed across the riverbank. "Mac?" Nag stood at the temple gates, her hair dripping with the rain, her eyes black with grief. The head monk raised a clay pot, etched with sacred scripts and sealed with wax. "Her spirit must be contained," he said, "before love turns to rage." Nag moved forward without touching the ground. A voice shook the wooden doors. "Let me see him." The monks struck the temple bell, and the sound cracked through the air like thunder. Nag screamed, a sound of heartbreak and fury, as the spirit was pulled toward the altar. Her form twisted, fading like smoke, drawn into the port's narrow mouth. The head monk slammed the seal shut, pressing a gold leaf over the wax. The chanting stopped, and in a sudden silence, Mac heard her voice one last time. "I waited for you." Years passed, and the village slowly healed. The fields grew green again, the river returned to its quiet flow, but no one forgot Nag. Not for her anger or her fearsome return, but for the love that held her here. On the banks of the Phra Khanong river, a shrine was built in her name. People began to leave offerings, flowers, incense, silk dresses, and tiny cradles for the child she never had. Young couples prayed for her, for loyalty, for protection, for love that endures. Some believe that Nak's spirit, once bound in sorrow, found peace through devotion, that her love transformed into a blessing. Even today, in modern Bangkok, people speak her name with respect, because they say true love does not end with death. This is Ghost Maps, where myths meet memory.